just one more question.
Sure.
And I was just wondering, what is a realistic timeline for the reopening of schools in Marin?
Um, Realistic. Let me define opening of school. All
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
Schools are not going to reopen. In other words, if the mindset is let's reopen in the same way that we attended school on March 13th, right? 2020, that's not going to happen for a long time, probably at least a year.
Mm.
That schools would be back to what we knew. And I want to go back to, let's hope we never go back to exactly the same way so that we've taken advantage of what we've learned. But what I want you to know is our school districts right now are working hard to figure out what are the conditions that are going to be necessary to be able to re-enter schools. And the guidelines we seem to understand, at least at this point, Josh, are number one, that we will be needing to avoid any and all large gatherings. So imagine your high school campus at Redwood. We can't have all the kids in the hall. We won't have people, in an assembly together, in the library together, eating, right, lunch together. So imagine that those kinds of activities will not be possible. So that's one.
Mhm.
The other shift will be what we don't yet know what's the number that we will be allowed to bring students back in. What's the cohort number, if you will?
Yeah.
What we do know is 12 is approved because we're already doing it in the child care centers. So we'll be waiting to see what that number is. But let's just say the number's 30. Let's pretend it was. Then we could anticipate that most of your classes at the high school would be able, right, to stay, but the students would have to stay in a stable cohort. It would be the same students moving from class to class to class, or staying in one class with the teacher only being the one that changes. So that will be a shift if that was the number. What if the number those 15? Then we will find ourselves in a situation where it's likely that not all students would be able to attend at the same time, right? So we would have maybe students Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, something like that, attending with other students attending the same classes virtually, though not in the room during the during the teacher's schedule. So that they would still attend school, but using a different model. And there's so many iterations, I think, of this that, but my hope, and we'll be piloting some programs this May to begin to look at what are all the things we need to consider. And we know that it will, involve training. What does the deep cleaning look like? How do we make sure everybody knows when we talk about a face covering, we're serious and it's for good reasons? What's the PPE that people are going to need? Do we need to take students' temperatures before they come in? What are the gloves we're going to need, the handy, the wipes, etc. So there's a lot that we're already working on to make sure that when the time is right and it's safe for students and adults, that we're going to be good to go. So, there is conversation the governor just mentioned yesterday about, can something happen as early as this summer? And that, I'm sure, will not mean a whole school opens, but rather that small cohorts of students would be able to come into the school environment. So bottom line is, that probably we will not see school as we've known it maybe ever again, in terms of the introduction of the opportunity to use virtual opportunities to enhance learning, which is a good thing. So we have that piece, but also it will be quite a while before we feel comfortable. And this is all related to the experts from public health. So public health is leading the way, and they're providing us the parameters that we need, so that we can understand what we'll be dealing with in order to have students come back to school. But I feel strongly, Josh, that relationships and connectivity, back to this whole mental health conversation really do matter. And you can't get that virtually. And so we have to figure out how do we get students in an environment where they get to interact, right, with their teachers and other staff at a school safely, so that that connectivity is in place as they move forward with their learning.
Hmm. And it seems like there's a lot that's going to change as this moves on. So do you think there's going to be room for communication between students and how it's working for them as this
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, your district, along with others, did a survey, right? And the survey was getting feedback from the students, the parents, the staff. How's this going, right? And for all of us, this was, this went from March 13th to March 16th. And in Marin County, what I'm very proud of is that there was a decision to do something,
Right.
even if it was half-baked and we weren't quite ready to begin, to try not to lose the connectivity, right? And in other places, they're still talking about it. So
Wow.
just know that while it's not perfect, there are so many people. I mean, look at what teachers are doing, what kids are doing to just totally do our very best to try to figure out what's the right mix of individual contact with students, group contact with students, what kinds of activities, how do we keep the connection? Because real education is about truly enhancing curiosity, right? Wanting to know more. And so there's a lot of hard work going on, and we know it's not perfect, and we know that there's been a learning loss for sure at all levels. But back to your point, particularly for our most vulnerable students, whether it's our students of color, our students who are poor, our students with special needs. So we've got a lot. We'll have a lot to do, and I do think it'll be incumbent on the schools to make sure as we re-enter the system, for those that will re-enter, to start with that baseline, right? How are you doing? How's the mental health? Anything we need to know? How did what worried you about this time? And then to look at the academics, and what are the areas we need to we really need to focus on. And I'm hoping that will be provided resources to actually provide additional supports, in-person supports to students to make up for the lost time. And the governor did sort of allude to the fact that that might be possible.
Hmm. Wow, I'm sure it sounds like there's a lot to work on, but
I know
yeah.
there is, Josh. That's why it was nice for me. But it's also a moment when we get to work together in significant and such important ways on behalf of all kids. So, we can see the best of each other, and sometimes, right, it could be, geez, it's not as right. This is hard. This is really hard. What's the right thing to do here? And just to know that the educators, whether it's the classified teams, the certificated teams, or the administrators, or the trustees, or the families, they're incredible. People do want for their own kids, but they want for other people's kids too. So we have the best by far, I already know it unequivocally, county, probably in the country, but for sure in California, given that we were the first community to lean in and say, okay, all right, I get it. We're going to be worrying about, all to do with virtual learning, but what about our doctors and nurses? How are we going to provide opportunities for them to even go to work now that we've closed schools? And all of these school districts just leaned right in to try to support that effort. And so, who does that? Very often communities worry about themselves individually, their silo, and say, sorry, we've closed schools. Well, not Marin. We've jumped right into what do we need to do? And so I think that sense of community and interconnectivity is what makes us strong, and what will help us make it through these next months, because they're sure to be challenging, but we're going to do it with a focus on students, and making sure that everything we do will be definitely guided by public health with safety first.